Imagine a world where the air itself is a poison. A world where a simple cough from a stranger can be a death sentence. This was the reality of medieval Europe. The Black Death, the Great Plague, a pestilence so vast it wiped out nearly half the continent. It was a force of nature, an indiscriminate killer that left mountains of the dead in its wake. In this age of terror, a new figure rose to prominence, a man of learning, of science, of hope. The doctor. He walked through the dying cities, a beacon in the darkness, armed with ancient knowledge and the promise of a cure. People flocked to him, begged for his help, put their lives in his hands, believing he was their only salvation from the plague's embrace. Today on Dark Chronicles, we will prove a terrifying thesis. We will demonstrate with historical evidence and chilling statistics that in the fight for survival, the greatest threat was not the disease, it was the cure. We will show you why the medieval doctor, with his well-intentioned but barbaric treatments, was often more dangerous, more lethal, and a more certain path to Dewa. If you believe that history holds the darkest secrets, subscribe to Dark Chronicles and ring the bell. You are about to enter a world where the healers were the killers, and the only chance of survival was to run from the man who promised to save you. To understand why medieval medicine was so deadly, we must first understand its foundation. It wasn't built on observation, experiment, or what we would call science. It was built on a single, fatally flawed idea, inherited from the ancient Greeks and championed by the Roman physician Galen, the theory of the four humors. The theory was elegant, symmetrical, and completely wrong. It stated that the human body contained four essential fluids, or humors, each linked to an element and a season. Blood associated with air and spring. It made you sanguine, cheerful, and full of life. Phlegm associated with water and winter. An excess made you phlegmatic, calm, and unemotional. Yellow bile associated with fire in summer. It made you choleric, angry, and aggressive. Black bile associated with earth in autumn. This was the source of melancholy, sadness, and depression. A healthy person had these four humors in perfect balance. Every illness, from a common cold to the raging plague, was believed to be caused by an imbalance, an excess of one humor, a fever, too much blood, a cough, too much phlegm, depression, too much black bile. The logic was simple, intuitive, and catastrophic. Because if the diagnosis for every disease is the same, an imbalance of humors, then the treatment for every disease also becomes the same. Remove the excess humor. This wasn't medicine, it was plumbing, and the human body was the faulty pipe. This idea of balance dominated medicine for over 1,500 years. What modern health fads do you think people in the future will look back on as our four humors? Let us know in the comments below. This single theory is the root of all the horror to come. It gave doctors a misplaced, unshakable confidence. They weren't guessing, they were rebalancing the very elements of life. They had a universal key to every ailment, and with that key, they unlocked the gates of hell for their patients. Every treatment that follows, every drop of blood spilled, every skull drilled, every ounce of poison administered, was done in the name of this elegant, symmetrical, and murderous idea. If the four humors was the theory, bloodletting was the practice. It was the cornerstone of medieval medicine, the go-to treatment for nearly everything. Headaches, fever, gout, epilepsy, pneumonia, insanity, and most terrifyingly, the plague. The logic was brutally simple. If illness is an excess of a humor, and blood is the most accessible humor, then draining the blood will restore balance. There were three main methods. The most common was venesection, the cutting of a vein, usually in the arm. Doctors had intricate charts showing which vein corresponded to which organ. A pain in the liver? You cut the vein in the right arm. A headache? The vein in the forehead. The second method was scarification, using a multi-bladed tool to make shallow cuts, followed by cupping, heating a glass cup and placing it over the cuts to create a vacuum that sucked the blood out. And then there were the leeches. A single medicinal leech can consume 10 times its body weight in blood. For a serious fever, a doctor might apply dozens at a time, leaving the patient pale and weak, covered in bleeding wounds. This wasn't a minor procedure. A modern blood donation is 1 pint. Medieval doctors would drain 2, 3, even 4 pints of blood from a single patient. That's up to 40% of the body's total blood volume. The result was not a cure. It was hypovolemic shock. The patient's blood pressure would plummet. Their heart would race, trying to pump non-existent fluid. Their organs would begin to shut down from lack of oxygen. They would grow cold, dizzy, and then lose consciousness. The doctor, tragically, would see this as a sign of success. The patient was calming down. The excess heat of the fever was leaving the body. In reality, the patient was dying. If you find this look into the dark past of medicine fascinating, hit the like button. It tells us you want more stories that uncover the brutal reality behind our modern world. And if the blood loss didn't kill you, the infection would. Instruments were rarely cleaned. A doctor would move from a plague victim to a woman in childbirth using the same bloody lancet, transferring bacteria with deadly efficiency. The very act of healing was a direct injection of sepsis. History is littered with the victims of this practice. King Charles II of England was bled of 24 ounces of blood in his final days. Lord Byron was bled to death in Greece. And most famously, America's first president, George Washington, suffering from a simple throat infection, was bled of nearly 4 liters of blood in less than 12 hours by his trusted doctors. He died that night. His illness was survivable. His treatment was not. Let's be clear. The Black Death had a mortality rate of around 50%. A patient with the plague had a coin flip's chance of survival if left alone. But if they were subjected to aggressive bloodletting, the death rate skyrocketed to an estimated 60, even 80%. The doctor's visit was a death sentence. If draining the body of its life force wasn't enough, medieval doctors had another favorite tool: poison. They didn't call it that, of course. They called it materia medica. But the effect was the same. Chief among these deadly remedies was mercury. Quicksilver, a beautiful, mesmerizing, and profoundly toxic heavy metal. The alchemist Paracelsus, a key figure in the transition from ancient to modern medicine, championed it. He believed that the body was a chemical system and that mineral cures could fight disease. He wasn't entirely wrong, but his chosen cure was a nightmare. Mercury was the go-to treatment for syphilis, which ravaged Europe in the late Middle Ages. It was also used for skin diseases, parasites, and even melancholy. It was administered in several horrifying ways. Patients were forced to drink it. It was injected into their bodies. Or they were slathered in mercury-based ointments and placed in heated ovens, forced to breathe in the toxic fumes for hours. The goal was to induce massive salivation, sometimes up to 3 pints a day. Doctors believed this was the disease leaving the body. In reality, it was the body screaming for help. The symptoms of the cure were far worse than the disease. It began with a metallic taste in the mouth, followed by loosening teeth which would eventually fall out. Then came the tremors, the hatter's shakes. The patient's personality would change. They would become irritable, paranoid. Finally, their kidneys would fail, their brain would swell, and they would die in a state of madness and agony. The death rate from aggressive mercury treatments is estimated to be between 50 and 70%. The doctor, seeing the patient getting sicker, would often conclude the disease was stubborn and increase the dose of the poison. This is a part of medical history that is rarely taught in schools. Share this video with someone who needs to know how far we've come and the horrifying path it took to get here. And mercury was not alone. Arsenic, the king of poisons, was a common ingredient in many medieval remedies, particularly for skin conditions. Antimony, another toxic metal, was used to induce violent purging. Patients were given pills of pure antimony, which would cause them to vomit and defecate uncontrollably. The pill would pass through the body, be retrieved from the feces, washed, and then given to the next patient. These everlasting pills were passed down through generations, a family heirloom of poison. This wasn't healing. This was a chemical assault on a body already weakened by disease. The doctors were not curing their patients. They were poisoning them, slowly, methodically, and with the best of intentions. If you were unlucky enough to have an ailment that couldn't be bled or poisoned away, you faced the third and perhaps most terrifying aspect of medieval medicine: surgery. Before the discovery of anesthesia and germ theory, a surgical operation was not a life-saving procedure. It was a form of torture with a slim chance of survival. Imagine having a limb amputated. There is no anesthetic. You are wide awake, held down by several strong men, as a surgeon takes a saw to your bone. The pain is unimaginable, a white-hot agony that could, and often did, kill from shock alone. The surgeon's only virtue was speed. The famous 19th century surgeon Robert Liston, known as the fastest knife in the West End, could amputate a leg in 2.5 minutes. His patients had a 1 in 10 chance of dying. The average surgeon's patient had a 1 in 4 chance. And that was in the 19th century. In the medieval period, the odds were far, far worse. If the shock and blood loss didn't kill you, the infection almost certainly would. Surgeons had no concept of germs. They wore their blood-stained aprons as a badge of honor. They used the same unwashed saws and knives on patient after patient. An open wound was not a sight to be protected, but a hole to be plugged. They would cauterize it with a red-hot iron, causing third-degree burns and sealing in any bacteria. Or they would pack it with cobwebs, animal dung, or moss. The result was almost always gangrene, sepsis, and a slow, agonizing death. But no procedure captures the terrifying ignorance of the age better than trepanation, the act of drilling, cutting, or scraping a hole in the human skull. It was performed to cure epilepsy, migraines, and mental illness, which were believed to be caused by evil spirits trapped inside the head. The hole was meant to let them out. Using primitive tools with no understanding of brain anatomy, the medieval doctor would bore into the skull of a conscious patient. The risk of slipping and plunging the drill into the brain was immense. The chance of causing a fatal hemorrhage was astronomical, and even if the patient survived the procedure itself, the open hole in their skull was a gateway for infection to enter the brain, leading to abscesses, meningitis, and certain death. The survival rate for medieval trepanation has been estimated at less than 20%. It was one of the most lethal procedures in the history of medicine. If you're fascinated by the history of surgery, check out our playlist on the evolution of the operating theater by clicking the link in the description. This was the surgeon's table, not a place of healing but a butcher's block, a place of screams, blood, and almost certain death. And people willingly submitted to it because the alternative, they were told, was even worse. So far, we have dealt with the anecdotal, the horrifying, the individual stories. But the true chilling scale of this medical massacre is only revealed when we look at the numbers. Let's perform a grim calculus, a statistical comparison between the disease and the cure. The Black Death in its bubonic form was a terrifying killer, but it was not invincible. Modern estimates based on historical records place its mortality rate at between 30 and 60%. Let's be generous and take the average. If you caught the plague and did nothing, no doctor, no treatment, just rest and prayer, you had a 50% chance of survival. A coin flip. Now let's look at the doctor's treatments for a severe illness. Aggressive bloodletting, estimated death rate 60 to 80%. Your chance of survival just dropped to as low as 20%. Mercury treatment, estimated death rate 50 to 70%. At best, no better than the plague. At worst, far deadlier. Trepanation, estimated death rate 70 to 90%. Your chance of survival is now barely 1 in 10. The numbers tell an undeniable story. In many cases, walking into a doctor's office was a statistically more dangerous decision than simply staying home and hoping your immune system could fight off the disease. The cure was, demonstrably, worse than the disease. Let's consider surgery. Before anesthesia, the average mortality rate for any major operation was around 40%. For an amputation, it could be as high as 50%. For abdominal surgery, it was close to 100%. You had a better chance of surviving a gunshot wound on a battlefield than you did of surviving the surgeon's knife in a hospital. Knowing these numbers, if you were transported back in time with a serious illness, would you go to a doctor or take your chances alone? Tell us your survival strategy in the comments. This is the terrifying paradox of medieval medicine. It wasn't a system of healing. It was a system that, through ignorance and misplaced confidence, actively harmed and killed the people it was trying to save. The doctors were not evil. They were not sadists. They were simply trapped in a system of knowledge that was fundamentally wrong, and they applied that knowledge with a diligence that was nothing short of lethal. They were the agents of a philosophy of death, and their clinics were the execution chambers. We live in a world of medical miracles. We have antibiotics that can cure infections in days. We have anesthetics that allow for painless surgery. We have a knowledge of the human body so profound that we can transplant organs and edit genes. It is easy to take this for granted. It is easy to forget the world we came from. The story of medieval medicine is not just a collection of horror stories. It is a vital, humbling reminder of the most dangerous thing in the world: ignorance armed with authority. The medieval doctor was not a monster. He was a man who believed he was doing good, armed with a set of beliefs that were profoundly, lethally wrong. He bled his patients because he thought he was saving them. He poisoned them because he thought he was curing them. He butchered them because he thought he was healing them. The history of medicine is filled with dark chapters. In our next video, we will explore the horrifying history of insane asylums and the torturous cures that were used to treat mental illness. Click here to continue your journey into the dark side of science. The plague was a mindless biological force. It did not reason, it did not choose. It simply killed. But the medieval doctor, he was worse. He was a thinking, reasoning human being who, through a fatal combination of ignorance and arrogance, created a system of medicine that was often more efficient at killing than the deadliest pandemic in human history. He is the ultimate proof that the road to hell is, indeed, paved with good intentions.